Hey leader, and welcome to episode number 314 of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Baratongue Advisors. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you'll enjoy our content and become a subscriber. Know that you can also watch all of our episodes over on our YouTube channel as well, so make sure you subscribe there as well. And if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, thank you so much. And it would mean the world to me if the podcast has made an impact on your life. If you would leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever app you listen to podcasts through, that really does help us to grow our audience and reach more leaders, which is our whole mission here at L3. So thank you in advance for that. And I do just want to take a second to highlight a recent review that was left by Dawn M. Dawn said this about the podcast. She said, "I never miss an episode. The guest speakers are spot on. Doug is a great interviewer, and I especially love the lightning round. I've learned so much from this podcast, and I listen to them over and over again. It should be in every leader's toolbox." Well, thank you so much, Dawn. It means the world to me that you left that review, and I'm glad the podcast has made an impact in your life. Well, leader, in today's episode, you'll hear my conversation with Charity Water CEO and founder Scott Harrison. If you're unfamiliar with Scott, let me just tell you a little bit about him. Scott spent almost 10 years as a nightclub promoter in New York City before leaving to volunteer on a hospital ship off the coast of Liberia, West Africa, as a volunteer photojournalist. Returning home to New York City 2 years later, he founded the nonprofit organization Charity Water in 2006. Turning his full attention to the global water crisis and the world's 785 million people without clean water to drink, he created public installations and innovative online fundraising platforms to spread international awareness of the issue. In 15 years, and with the help of more than 1 million donors worldwide, Charity Water has raised over $598 million and funded 79,136 water projects in 29 countries. When completed, these projects will provide more than 13.2 million people with clean, safe drinking water. Scott has been recognized on Fortune magazine's list of 40 under 40, Forbes Impact 30, and Fast Company's 100 most creative people in business, where he earned the number 10 spot. He is currently a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader and author of the New York Times Bestselling Book, Thirst. Scott and his wife, Viktoria, have 2 children, Jackson and Em. In our conversation, you'll hear Scott talk about the lessons he's learned about leadership, vision casting, fundraising, and more throughout his journey of growing Charity Water. And of course, we take him through the lightning round. You're going to love this conversation. But before we dive into that, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Baratongue Advisors. The financial advisors at Baratongue Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Baratongue Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at baratongueadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities and investment products and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SIPC. Baratongue Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. My wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings through Henny Jewelers, and we had an incredible experience. But not only do they have great jewelry, they also love and invest in people. In fact, for every couple that comes in and gets engaged, they give them a book to help prepare for marriage, and we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And with all that being said, let's dive right in. Here's my conversation with Scott Harrison. Well, hey, Scott, thank you so much for being willing to do this interview. And you formed a little organization called Charity Water. I don't know if anyone's listening to this and hasn't heard of it, I'd be shocked. But tell us a little bit about Charity Water. What does Charity Water do, and what's the story behind it?
Sure. Well, it does exactly what it sounds like. I was not very creative in the naming. We are a nonprofit organization bringing water, clean, safe drinking water to people in need around the world. Been around 15 years now, and just crossed 15 million people with water across 29 different countries. That said, there are 771 million people who are drinking unsafe water today. So we're about 1/50th of the way there.
Yeah, and you have kind of a crazy story. You know, people see what you're doing today, but if they rewound your life, 20 years ago, look a little bit different. Can you kind of give us the pre-story to Charity Water and then roll into how that actually started?
Yeah, so I was raised in a very conservative Christian home. I was born in Philadelphia, raised in New Jersey. My mom became disabled when I was 4. There was a carbon monoxide gas leak in our house. that made my dad and I sick, but we were able to recover, and she just never did. So she was an invalid my whole life. I was an only child, caregiver role, doing the cooking, doing the cleaning, taking care of mom, taking her to the doctor. And, in that phase of life, I wanted to be a doctor myself. So if you'd asked me as a teenager, what are you going to be when you grow up? I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to cure mom and other people around the world. Instead, I became a nightclub promoter, Doug. So I moved to New York City, rebelled in a such a cliche way, and spent the next 10 years drinking, drugging, gambling, just kind of debauching my way through Manhattan nightlife. Became pretty good at that profession. I worked at 40 different nightclubs, throwing these high-end parties and spraying $1,000 bottles of champagne over the audience and, from the DJ booth, and just really a complete idiot. But, was really caught up in this lifestyle of sex and drugs and, rock and roll and fashion. And then at 28, just realized, oh my gosh, I've become the worst person I know. I hate myself. I hate my life. Nobody else is really happy. There's never going to be enough of any of these things that I'm pursuing that would satisfy. And I had a pretty radical comeback to faith and morality moment, sold everything I owned, and decided to take 1 year and volunteer on a humanitarian mission to see if I could be useful to the world. And it was funny. The first 10 organizations that I applied to denied my application because nightclub promoters are not in hot demand for serious, credible aid worker organizations. But I was very fortunate to find an opportunity to go live on a medical hospital ship in Liberia, West Africa, and really just completely changed my life. I quit smoking and drinking and drugging and gambling and all that stuff, and kind of, came really back to closer to Act One. And it was in that 2-year experience in West Africa where I saw people drink dirty water for the first time. And I had just never experienced a human being, a child, drinking brown, viscous, diseased water. And I think the contrast was so, noticeable for me because I had been selling bottled water in my clubs for $10 a bottle, and just couldn't believe that, 10% of the world didn't have the most basic need for life, for health met. So 15 years ago, decided I was going to make that my problem, and do whatever I could to bring clean and safe drinking water to every single person alive on the planet before I died. And thought that, raising awareness and money through a nonprofit would be the way to do that.
Yeah. Before we dive into more of the story of Charity Water from the beginning, I'm curious, you talked about you had a radical comeback in life and you ultimately quitted drinking, drugs, gambling, all those things. What did that journey look like? I'm just curious.
Now I like my craft beer, so I
oh yeah,
in moderation, of course, but never touched any of the other stuff.
Can you share more about that? And for someone who may be struggling with that lifestyle right now, what would you tell them? Was it just finding a purpose bigger than yourself that got you out of that? What was it?
And it was changing community, Doug. So I went from a community that celebrated dinner at 10, the club at 12, after hours, and drugs at 5 a.m., and then popping Ambien at noon to come down and start it all over again. So that whole lifestyle was fast. It was about sex and drugs and status. My heart changed, but I think I really also needed my environment to change. So I went from that to a group of Christian doctors in Africa. It was not cool to smoke on a hospital ship. Nobody was doing drugs. I think you were allowed to have like one drink with a meal, as a part of the code of conduct. So my environment changed, and I really love that. It felt so much healthier. It felt so much more purposeful. Here were people who had come from 41 different nations as volunteers to use their talent, medical in most cases, in the service of others who had no access to healthcare. So I don't know that I would have been able to just, quit all that stuff while staying in the nightclub business. I think it would have been almost impossible. So I really needed to change my environment as well.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, do you think if you didn't go through that season of the nightclub promotion, do you think you'd be doing what you're doing today at the level you're doing it?
I think you could see that both ways. Sometimes I wish I had started Charity Water before I was, 28 or 29. Yeah. Actually, I started at 30. So it feels like 10 wasted years. That said, I learned a lot about promotion and storytelling and the transfer of enthusiasm during those 10 years promoting 40 different clubs, because that was really the job of a promoter. I mean, that was in our name. We were nightclub promoters. We were promoting this idea that we had the best party in all of New York City. And if you got past the velvet rope, if you got in past one of us looking through the one-way glass, and if you spent $25 on a margarita or $1,000 on a bottle of Veuve, then your life had meaning. You had arrived. You had made it. So, I'm saying all that tongue in cheek now. I think, for the last 15 years with Charity Water, I'm still promoting a universally good idea of clean water for all and celebrating generosity and compassion and kind of redemptive acts of service instead of debauchery. So I was able to take some of those learnings into the work with Charity Water over the last 15 years. But also I think a lot of that time was just wasted.
And so you're 30 years old, you find what you want to give your life to. Walk us through, the start of Charity Water. My understanding is that when you started it, you wanted to change the way charities do charity. And I think you've accomplished that in the past 15 years. Talk about that journey. What did that look like in the beginning to where you are now?
Yeah, well, I didn't have any experience. So I think that worked to my advantage in a way. I was not corrupted by any institutional philanthropic knowledge, or I just talked to everyday people who worked at Chase Bank or Sephora or MTV. And as I talked to people, I realized, wow, they were really cynical and distrustful when it came to charities. People told me they weren't giving because they didn't know how much of their money would actually, get there or impact anything. So I really, the mission was going to be to bring clean water to everybody in the world. But the vision was even bigger. It was to reinvent or reimagine the charitable experience, the giving experience, and reach out to some of these disenchanted, disenfranchised people, bring them back to the table of giving. So, the first idea I had was, could we find a way to give 100% of every donation that ever came in to the charity to directly fund water projects that gave people clean water? And what that would need to look like is we would somehow have to raise all of that nasty overhead money separately. The staff salaries, the office rent, the flights, the Epson copy machine toner. This would be paid for by a small group of kind of visionary entrepreneurs or business leaders. So that was really the first big idea: 2 separately audited bank accounts, all the public money going directly to fund the projects, and then the overhead being paid for separately. The second kind of pillar or big idea was this idea of using technology to prove where the money went, let people see their impact. So we became, the first nonprofit to geolocate every completed water project on Google Earth and Google Maps. So, now close to 100,000 projects across 29 countries, but every single one has a satellite image, a proof location. And we just made all this data transparent from the start. And then I think the third, big idea was to build an epic and imaginative and inspiring brand, a brand that rivaled Nike or Apple or Virgin, a brand that was not based on shame or guilt, but opportunity and hope and inspiration. So, kind of put these things together, and then also realized from a business model approach, I wanted to be asset light. So I didn't want to start well drilling operations in each of these countries around the world. We would work through the locals in each of these countries. So I believe for the work to be culturally appropriate and sustainable, it had to be led by Ethiopians in Ethiopia, led by Cambodians in Cambodia. So our job would be to find and identify and then build the capacity and help these local organizations scale their impact. But they would be the ones on the ground doing the work and getting the credit.
Wow. Well, I love those initiatives. I want to dive into each one. The first one, fundraising. I was mentioned to you earlier. I'm a fundraiser. That's what I do vocationally. And so, you have the model where 100% of the overhead is paid for. I believe the model there is you meet with people of high net worth and basically just pitch them on that. One, is that something, because I know a lot of other nonprofits now are trying to mimic and copy that model. Is that something you would recommend? There's a lot of nonprofits that have to raise money. Is that something you recommend today? And no. So tell us more about that. Yeah.
I mean, it was right for us. I would do it again today. It was right for the people we were trying to reach out to and the problem I was trying to solve. What I think donors want is just transparency.
Yeah.
People just want to know where the money is going. So there are a lot of different ways to achieve that goal. Our organization has overhead just like yours and just like, Doctors Without Borders or World Vision or Save the Children. Our overhead is about 20 cents on the dollar. We just go get that 20 cents from 100 families. Therefore, millions of people can give in a pure way. But I think that has really worked for us. It has been a distinctive. We have heard time and time and time again that this is the reason people are giving. And we've heard many times, this is the first charitable gift I've made in my life.
Wow.
But I know that all of this money is going to go where it's needed. So I mean, it's you're creating twice as much work for yourself. It's incredibly challenging. I mean, you have to run two separate bank accounts in perfect balance in perpetuity. I mean, existentially, we could have $100 million in a water account, right? And then miss payroll because we can't touch a penny of the public's money for water projects. We could also overraise, I guess, although this has never been a problem, for the overhead side where, we're an inefficient organization because we're not deploying a multiple of that into the field on water projects. So it's a very delicate balance. It's this has been core to our vision and business model. So we've made it work really well for 15 years, but it's not something I'm out there, preaching to others. I am preaching transparency and closing the loop and showing donors what their money's actually accomplished.
Yeah, I think the transparency thing is key. The other thing I think you do extraordinarily well is just cast vision. I'd be curious, what advice do you have fundraisers, but really just leaders in general? I know you've told this story. You've done thousands of podcasts. I'm sure thousands of donor meetings. What have you learned about casting a compelling vision that people buy into in your time?
Well, I'm glad you start there. So when people ask me about fundraising, I think there are three things that I think about. The first is having a compelling vision and then clearly articulating it.
Yes.
A lot of people have tried to tell us what their nonprofits do in like 19 sentences. And at the end, they actually may have a compelling vision, but they have muddled it or, you've just lost the clarity of that. Ours is luckily very simple. We're bringing clean water to people. That's it. Like clean water for people. Good idea. People need it. And then, should we need to kind of talk about all the statistics and all the problems that go with dirty water, all of that is there. But at the very core, it's a vision most people can get excited about. A world where every human alive has clean water to drink, has the most basic need for life met. So that's kind of the vision. The second is momentum. So I've found that people want to be a part of things that are working and are growing. Donors don't want to save the day. They don't want to save, Sally's job in accounting when you've had a bad year. Donors aren't investing in stocks that are laying employees off and are, shrinking, right? So I think the momentum is really important. Celebrating the wins, talking about the progress that your organization is making, talking about the innovation, the new creative ways you are trying to solve your problem is really, really important. And, the more you grow, the more you grow. And the more you innovate, the more you innovate. So it almost becomes this flywheel effect. And then the third thing is generosity, which I probably could say the least about, but I just intuitively believe that donors want their organizations or maybe even their representatives, the people that are representing those organizations, to also be generous, to kind of join them in generosity. So, I've got a lot of stories of how Charity Water has tried to do that over the years, but I think that's that's kind of a secret weapon that you can use. I mean, my wife and I donated 100% of my book advance and all the proceeds back to Charity Water. We've now given over $1 million of our own money to Charity Water over 15 years. So when I'm sitting with a donor, I'm not asking them to do anything that I'm not willing to do. Right. Yeah. There's kind of a sense of eating your own dog food. And I'll use that at times. And sometimes people will ask me, well, have you? I'm like, I did 3 water projects last year, and I'm asking them for maybe 300. And they can afford to do 300 and I could afford to do 3.
Going back to the vision, and you talked about marketing was one of your key strategies. I'm curious how much of you casting vision is showing versus telling. So I believe you used to, in the early days, you would just meet with someone and pull up an iPad, stick headphones in their ears and say, watch this. I mean, obviously you were casting vision too. You guys do an incredible job marketing. I forget what I was watching the other day, but again, you just have a picture of like every well piece and say, for $10,000, you buy this.
Yeah.
How much has visual marketing played into your ability to cast vision? And do you have any advice there for nonprofits?
Yeah.
Or
I mean,
really
early
leaders?
days, that guy would say show, don't tell. Now it's
Wow.
show and tell. I mean, it is, but I think even extreme, if I told you right now that 771 million people don't have water, so that's just kind of a mind-numbing statistic. There's no emotional connection to that. You can't imagine 771 million anything, right? Units of anything, let alone people without water. Okay, 52% of disease throughout the developing world is waterborne. Okay, 82% of the people live in rural areas. Every dollar invested into water yields $4 to $8 in economic returns. I mean, there's data, so much data to make a compelling case for water, but it's not emotional. It doesn't draw people in. Stories do. And I would argue, I could tell you a story and then I could show you the water that the child in that story is drinking. And it will leave just such a visceral imprint, could compel you to action far greater than disconnected numbers, or even a story. So we've tried to. I mean, there was a story I wrote about in the book of a 13-year-old girl who hung herself from a tree after she spilled her water after an 8-hour walk in Ethiopia, and I wound up living in this village for a week and walking in her footsteps and learning everything about her and her friends and how people lived and what would have driven her to suicide after spilling her water that she was carrying. But for me, as I knew I would tell that story on the road in speeches, or I was going to write about it in the book, when I stood under the tree, the actual tree, I knew that the image of the tree would be very powerful, and it would move people in a different way. And it's this frail tree, and there's really only one branch that you can imagine a 13-year-old's body hanging from, with a noose around her neck. And there's a path that goes right next to this tree, which is where she was walking when she tripped and fell and spilled her water. So, I just, for me, that visual image was so arresting. Being there, before I even pulled out a camera, and activated me with anger at the time that we live in a world of $500 million yachts and we're talking about colonizing other planets, and 13-year-old girls are hanging themselves from trees because they don't have clean water. But I think it's that combination of, I would say, it's storytelling, it's visuals, and then, of course, the facts are important as well.
Yeah, I just want to, you talked about, we live in a world of $500 million yachts. You ran nightclubs where people will spend extraordinary amounts of money every single night. And then now on the charity water side, you've seen extraordinary generosity from people. I'm just curious, what have you learned about money throughout this journey?
I've seen less extraordinary generosity than you might expect. I've seen extraordinary gifts for sure. But as a proportion of wealth, what have I learned about money? Well, I think so if there's any other nonprofit fundraisers out there, probably the most powerful thing anyone has ever said to me, it was a conversation I had in California. It was a partner at Goldman Sachs, an ex-partner at Goldman Sachs. And I was about to make a big gift in Hawaii. And I was flying through and I had drinks with him in California. And I said, hey, I'm about to ask this family for a lot of money. It was an 8-figure gift. And I'm pretty nervous about this. I said, so I'm sure you and your wife have been asked for way more money than you were prepared to give. I said, tell me how it makes you feel. And now the fundraiser's perspective going into this is, we're going to offend them.
Right,
Doug? I'm going to ask you for money and you're going to be like, what? Like, how dare you? Well, he said the exact opposite. He said, I feel flattered. I feel flattered that they think I would be that generous. So that was a big paradigm shift for me. Going in, kind of sometimes reluctant or shy. Now, he said, if they have researched me poorly, then I will take offense. So if they ask me for money that I absolutely could not give, then it would be completely different. But if it's something I could do, he said, sometimes I go home and I ask my wife, I say, what would it take for us to be that generous? What would it take for us to make a gift that significant? So I've kind of, I've kept that in. And I got to say, though, I asked somebody for what I thought was a whole lot of money just a few weeks ago. And, it was a really beautiful proposal. And our team spent really months just preparing one ask. And when I synced up with the supporter, he said, well, we really only have one question. Why'd you ask for so little?
Wow.
And then they wound up giving 4 times more than what we'd asked. Now, that rarely happens, but I think that is what I've learned. You have to really have an abundance mentality. You have to ask, and you have to really, stretch. You also need the organization that can deploy the capital. So It took me 15 years to build an organization where I know exactly what to do with $50 million.
Right.
Like I can with a surety deploy $50 million and get the next million people clean water. So I couldn't have done that 5 years ago. I could have done it 7 years ago. So you also need, because people can see through that as well. You can't get too far over your skis.
Yeah. You've also done an incredible job building an online subscription model for people to get involved with giving. Can you talk more about that and ways people can actually get involved now if they're interested?
Yeah, well, I was with the founder of Spotify in Ethiopia in the back of a Land Rover. He'd funded a couple projects. This is 6 years ago. And, we were really successful in peer-to-peer fundraising. Charity Water had this idea of getting people to donate their birthdays. And instead of gifts or a party, they would ask for their age in dollars. And 100% of the money would be tracked to clean water projects. So we raised about $100 million through this huge movement of birthdays and other fundraisers. But the problem is people only donated one birthday, Doug. And we effectively, in 10 years, had built a one-time donation organization. And I remember being in the back of the Land Rover with Daniel, and he's like, dude, your business model sucks. He's like, January 1, dark day of the year. Right? You look back and you're like, we have to do that over again with different people. And then we have to grow. So he said, well, that's not how I think about Spotify. I mean, I'm trying to acquire a customer for life.
Right.
And deliver music and content, over a lifetime. I mean, I don't ever want anybody to quit. So anyway, I mean, it took me 10 years too long, but I came back and launched a subscription membership program called The Spring. And very simple idea. It costs $40 to get one human clean water. And there's a lot of people that could do that every month. It's 2 Netflixes a month. There's some people that could do $10 a month, right? And every 4 months, they could get one person access to clean water. So we launched The Spring, kind of marketed it as, alongside your 15 other subscriptions, you will get nothing in return. You're not going to get music or free shipping or a place to store your photos or, magazines, but 100% of the value will be passed on to humans who need water. And you'll provide the most basic need in life. That community was and is growing and is so successful. It really tripled the size of the organization. So It helped triple Charity Water and most importantly, our impact, over the last 5 years or so. So we now have Spring members from 149 countries around the world. We have Spring members in Africa. We have a Spring member in North Korea. I didn't even know that was possible, that you could give money in North Korea to Charity Water. So that's been really exciting. And, you mentioned how could people help? We actually set up a link if people wanted to learn more. It's just charitywater.org/L3. You can see a video there. There's a video that's had about 70 million views, which is the story of Charity Water. You can learn more about The Spring. But that is where our growth is going to come from. So I am way more excited about that than 7 or 8 figure gifts, because there are millions and millions of people out there who could do something for the cause of clean water every single month. And that adds up to a lot more than, a major gift.
Yeah. And we'll include a link to that in the show notes. I also want to talk to you about just donor experiences. So you guys throw a huge gala every year, raise millions of dollars. Obviously, you did this for a living, promoting in the nightclub. What advice do you have for those of us who do put on events when it comes to raising money? It sounds like you throw quite a party.
Try to make them awesome. Try to make them inspiring and fun. No rubber chicken dinners. I mean, we always try to include elements of surprise and delight. And I mean, we, have done satellite feeds to live drilling in Ethiopia across an ocean, connecting our community of givers at the gala with a community about to get clean water. We've synced 500 iPads to screens in this dynamic experience. So I think a lot of it just starts with having a really brilliant, creative vision of how to take people through an experience. I mean, a visceral, emotional experience, not serving them rubber chicken and making, a bunch of keynote PowerPoint speeches and then asking them to, bid on a signed jersey or something.
Yeah. So no, you don't do any auctions.
No auctions.
Anything like that. Great food.
You can't
I'm
buy
guessing.
anything at the gala. I hate the idea of buying something. You have people in a different part of their brain. The transactional, somebody's looking at a watch, it's like, oh, I would get that cheaper. They're price haggling in their own brain over every item that you would try to sell them. No, we're all about generosity. We want people to think about how they might be able to contribute in a generous way to impact change. I don't want them buying anything.
Yeah. And do you do the ask at the end? And is everything there that night? Is the ask just...
Everything's that night,
hey,
yeah. The whole night leads to the ask. Right. The whole story of the night leads to a certain thing that we can all do together in this room in the next 15 minutes. Wow. Sometimes I think the last time we had a goal of 5 million and we wound up raising 7 million. So sometimes we do more than we'd hoped we would achieve in that night. But it's always very specific. We're launching a new country where we found 1,000 wells that are broken and need to be rehabilitated. Wow. And we want to leave tonight with all 1,000 paid for example. And sometimes you get to 1,300 or 1,500.
This is a leadership podcast, and we want to talk a little bit about leadership. What have you learned about leadership over the last 15 years of leading Charity Water?
I just think integrity is the most important thing. Staying true to your values, knowing, just not compromising the way you do things is so much more important than whatever that is you're doing, the actual kind of task or tactic. And I think you just got to show up. I saw the 27-year stock chart of Amazon the other day, and it's fantastic. In the first 20 years of Amazon, 7% of the value was created. In the last 7 years, 93% of the value.
That's crazy.
So if Jeff Bezos had tapped out in year 20, he would have left 93% of the impact, and that's just realizing market cap off the table. So I guess the lesson there is things take time. I am massively frustrated that we have only raised $700 million in 15 years. This is a fraction of what is needed to bring everybody clean and safe drinking water. It's a fraction of what we should have done with all the generous people out there, with all the capital, latent, inert capital in the world. And we've managed to raise $700 million and help 15 million people. So, I'm very much focused on the best. It feels like we're in the second inning, and that the best is certainly yet to come.
If you could go back and meet with yourself when you started Charity Water, what three things would you tell yourself for the journey ahead, or maybe something you would have done differently?
I find it very hard, Doug, to look back. My brain doesn't really do back. I really spend. It's hard for me to be in the present, to be quite honest. I lose my keys and wallet, and I'm definitely thinking a lot about the future. One of the when you frame it in mistakes, that's a lot easier. So data, CRM, systems and processes, totally botched that. There was a point where I think we had like 1 million donors in an Excel spreadsheet. We just never stopped and took the time to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in sophisticated systems and data architecture. And we've been paying the price over the last few years, doing that when we're already at scale. So those projects are happening now, but boy, I wish I had done that a lot earlier. And I think that looked like hiring the right people and then investing in that. And, when someone says, hey, would you like to spend $250,000 on a Salesforce integration or do an event or hire, a few new employees, right? The CRM integration never happened.
That's hilarious.
And we actually would have, had we slowed down a few times, had we invested in those critical systems and architecture, I actually believe we'd raise more money.
Wow.
We would have to go slower to go faster.
Oh, yeah, that'll preach. Were there any other pivotal moments or failures that ultimately led to a success? Any fun stories?
I wrote about this in the book. We got sued once in like our third year because we had raised a bunch of money from a company and deployed 100% of the capital in Kenya. Didn't really know what we were doing early on, so we were just relying on the expertise of our partners. We had communicated no risk to the company, and 50% of the wells were unusable because they had such high quality, such high fluoride content, naturally occurring fluoride, which, by the way, is very common in the Rift Valley. You get about 1 out of 2 to work. But because we were such a young organization, the company kind of felt ripped off. Like, hey, we got 50% of what we paid for, and it wound up being settled with a really positive resolution for Charity Water in the end. But it was a huge learning that we needed. I guess it challenged the initial assumption that all we needed to do was be good at awareness and raising money, and let all the other good water orgs just do good water work. Well, it turned out like half of them were doing really bad work.
Wow.
Or mediocre, subpar work. So we needed to build a whole business unit of our own water experts and hydrogeologists and auditors so a whole new business, or really half of Charity Water was formed through that really uncomfortable, bad situation. And I wrote a whole chapter about this in the book and some of the learnings. So it turned out to be kind of the biggest blessing for the organization and the sustainability of the organization and the quality of the work that we did in the 13 years subsequent, but really painful at the time.
Do you have any advice? Obviously, you launched Charity Water after you found what you wanted to give your life to. What advice do you have for people with a dream? Maybe they're working a job and they're just content discontent. They have a dream in their heart, or they see a need they could fill. What advice would you say to someone who has that?
I feel like this is just cliche now, and like 100 people are saying this, but You have to start. You just have to start. I talk to so many people that are just paralyzed. They don't do anything. They literally will just talk about the same idea for 3 or 5 years. I mean, I don't know, start with a fundraiser in the basement of your house. Raise $1,000 for the cause, or, spend time on weekends or at nights instead of watching Netflix's, new bingeable show, researching the issue that you're passionate about, or the other actors in the space that are tackling that problem. But I think it's action that births movements. I mean, if I think back to the early days of Charity Water, we were working 100 hours a week, and that's very unpopular now. And, I've got kids and have a completely different rhythm, but it was startup days. I mean, we weren't sure whether we were going to make payroll, 3 days from now or 7 days from now. So there was a flurry of activity. There was a flurry of intense, passionate work. And then that actually led to the building of momentum, and then more resources, and then the creation of a structure and an organization. So my wife was just saying the other day, she asked me like 3 questions about a campaign we launched. And she's like, you really have no idea what's happening at your organization anymore. And like this campaign got launched, and I'm like, I don't know who had the idea for the campaign. I don't really know how those partnerships came about. This is hiring great people and letting them do their thing. So in the early days, I mean, that's completely different. I was pixel pushing. I was writing every email that went out. I was writing the website copy. I was writing the FAQ for the website. Now there's just people that are much more talented that can do all those things.
Do you do anything intentionally with networking? You have quite a network that you've built. And I guess I would just ask, has that been intentional, or has that been more just the work and the vision opening up those doors for you?
It's not. I have not been very good at that. We do have an amazing network, I think, because we're doing great work and we're innovative and we're good storytellers, and we like people. But I remember coming across some of the Keith Ferrazzi stuff, or just thinking, wow, I'm so unintentional. I'm so disorganized. My contacts don't sync as well as they should. And I think I could have done a much better job at that. But maybe the flip side is it is very organic. I mean, there's no grand plan for contacts. And, I just talked to a guy right before this podcast who I hadn't seen for 10 years. He came on a trip to Ethiopia with me, and, he's now in the crypto space and running a huge company. And we kind of picked up 10 years later, talking about our kids and talking about life and, our experiences during COVID, and, almost like 10 years hadn't passed. So I think, I take an organic approach to a lot of these relationships.
Yeah, with the time we have left, I want to run through the lightning round, just a bunch of fun questions I ask in every interview. First one being, what's the best advice you've received and who gave it to you?
Dr. Gary Parker on the Mercy ship, who was a doctor, had been there for 25 years, said something to the effect, and I'm going to paraphrase, but if I really cared about being a doctor or global health or medicine, then I would just get everybody on earth clean water. And it would have more impact than any doctor in the history of the world.
Wow. If you could put a quote on a billboard for everyone to read, what would it say?
give more.
Love it. What do you wish people knew about your journey that they may not know?
Oh, man. I don't know. I wrote a 100,000 word book. I'm like the most transparent guy that I know. My wife says I overshare like crazy. I don't know that there are many secrets, or it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. You know, people, I got asked the other day, Doug. So, like, do you do charity water full time? No, we just raise $100 million a year. You know, I just do 5 hours a week, just sometimes 7 hours a week.
Wow.
Yeah. I think people don't really understand how much goes into starting an organization, building an organization, running an organization, all of the challenges and complexity.
What's your biggest leadership pet peeve?
Oh, laziness and people who just want to talk about the problems and not find solutions. So maybe kind of pessimism, cynicism, snark. You've
had some incredible experiences in your life. I'm just curious, have you done anything, maybe crossed an item off your bucket list if you have one, that you think everyone else should experience before they die?
Yes, Victoria Falls on the Zambia Zimbabwe border. Just one of the most magnificent sights and sounds on Earth.
Yeah, I got to go.
I've been to 70 countries now, and that makes top 10 places.
That's amazing. I got to
Israel
see it in 2007. Well. Israel? Wow.
Yeah, I had an amazing trip to Israel.
You've been to 70 countries. Is there anything left on your bucket list to do?
Well, I haven't been to Arkansas, Wisconsin, Alaska, or Kansas. So I'm actually focused on the 4 states that I have not been to, and I'm hoping to get invited to Alaska to speak or something.
That's awesome. Well, if anyone's out there in Alaska, hire Scott to speak. I know you don't like going back to the past, but I am curious. I always like to ask, if you can go back and have coffee with yourself at any age, what age would it be, and what would you tell that Scott?
Probably 22, 23. And it would be a warning that I am not going to find happiness in the drugs and the drinking and the smoking and kind of the life of vice. But I wouldn't have listened. That's the thing about that question, Doug. 100% of the people would not have taken the advice from themselves at that younger age.
So good.
We all knew better. But people were trying to give us advice. We just didn't listen.
And at the other end of your life, you've left quite a legacy already with what you've done through Charity Water. What do you want to be remembered for? What do you want your legacy to be?
Yeah. Great husband, great father, great friend, and generous.
Anything else you want to leave leaders with today?
I don't know. We covered a lot. Check out, if anybody, really one way people can help is just to learn more about our story and share the video or join the spring. So check out the page we made for you guys, charitywater.org/L3.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for adding value to me today and everyone that will listen to this. And again, thanks for everything you do to change the world for thousands of lives every year.
Thanks for having me.
Well, hey, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Scott. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with him and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/314. And just a reminder, if you'd like to get involved and actually become a donor for Charity Water, they created a special link just for us at L3. It's charitywater.org/L3. And leader, as always, I just want to challenge you that if you want to 10x your growth this year, then you need to either launch or join an L3 Leadership Mastermind Group. Mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the last 7 years. And if you're unfamiliar with what they are, they're just groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together on a consistent basis to help each other go after their goals, hold each other accountable, and to do life together. So if you would like to learn more about joining or launching a mastermind group, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds. And leader, as always, I like to end with a quote, and I'll quote Simon Sinek today. He said this: He said, integrity is when you say the same things publicly that you say privately. We say it all the time here, leaders. Character development is the most important development. Make sure you're a man or woman of integrity. Well, leader, thanks again for listening to this episode. Know that Laura and I love you. We believe in you. And keep going. Keep leading. The world desperately needs your leadership. We'll talk to you next episode.